There's a light at the end of the tunnel. Keep your eyes on the road ahead. But if you're feeling lost in the night, it's okay to cry, just as long as you hold your head. 'Cause we're on our way to better. Better's ahead. Better's ahead. It gets worse before it gets better. But better's ahead. Better's ahead. Better days are coming. Better days are coming. Better days, better days. Better days are coming. I know you've been kicked out, slept on, let down, faith gone, waiting for too long for something to lean on. You feel weak, just be strong. Deep breath, stay calm. If you just press on, press on, press on, you gon' see there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Keep your eyes on the road ahead. And if you're feeling lost in the night, it's okay to cry, just as long as you hold your head. 'Cause we're on our way to better. Better's ahead.
Good morning and welcome, folks. Welcome to today's program on recovery and beyond youth organizing for a better and more equitable future. My name is Daniel Lau. I use he, him pronouns. I'm affiliated with Northern California Grantmakers as our program and events manager, and I'm just really happy to welcome you all to today's program. I wanted to open the space today just by also acknowledging the heaviness and the sadness that I think we're all hearing from yesterday's events of news of murders and shootings in Georgia and the Atlanta area that targeted spa and massage parlors, and that the majority of those victims that were killed and murdered were Asian American women. And I think that although there's differing news and motives of accounts of the shooter's motives, that this is also an incredible time and an important time to think about the intersectionality of news. And although it is, I don't know that I've heard accounts that it's been deemed a hate crime that's targeted toward these individuals, but when we think about certain industries or certain lines of work that our economies and our society is sexualized, it's genderized, and thinking about the work that many Asian American and many Asian American women do, that there are these connections for us to be thoughtful about. And that this continues terrible and tragic news and events that's also taking place here in the Bay Area that is targeting Asian American communities. And so wanted to hold some space to acknowledge that, and just to acknowledge that that may be the energy and the sentiments that many of us are feeling today, and want to honor that. So thank you for taking a moment to allow me to share that. But I'd like to move us into that and channel energy and hope and optimism into today's program, because we have an exciting lineup of youth organizers and youth leaders to share with you what they're working on, what they're seeing and hearing in the field, and how we all as funders and in the funder community can get involved and engage with this work to advance racial equity and to create the systems of change that we need, so that these instances don't happen, and that there is equal opportunity and an equitable future for all. So I'm here on behalf of the Northern California Youth Organizing Funder Collaborative, and we are really here to develop this robust and healthy and vibrant ecosystem to support young people and to lift up youth organizing as a regional equity building strategy here in the Bay Area and Northern California. I won't go into too much detail here because I have wonderful colleagues who will talk about the work of our collaborative and the work that we've accomplished thus far and what we're headed into. But really just want to emphasize that, folks, today This is a great space and an opportunity to listen and to learn and be in relationship and connect with young people. There's so much wisdom and so much energy and vibrancy to share with us. And I hope that you'll join me in being excited to listen and to learn. Also wanted to acknowledge that today is a very bittersweet day for me. On a personal note, I'm transitioning out of NCG at the end of the week and moving on to the Libra Foundation. So today is actually the last NCG program that I'll be hosting, so it's very bittersweet and joyous, all the feels and all the emotions that are associated with that. But wanted to thank and acknowledge each one of you for your energy and participation in our work. I wanted to take this opportunity to share that my colleague Kate Seeley, who is NCG's Senior Director of Leadership, Culture, and Community, will be the representative for on NCG's behalf for the Youth Organizing Funder Collaborative. And want to pass it over to Kate just to say a quick hello and introduce herself to those in the room today.
Great, thank you, Daniel. We're just so happy for you, and it's bittersweet for us too to see you go, but you're stepping into such an amazing role and have done such amazing work with this collaborative. So thank you. This is really meaningful work for NCG, and I'm working closely with Daniel right now to get the lay of the land and get engaged, and we'll be contracting support to really focus on this work because of its importance and the energy behind it. So rest assured, we've got this, and we are excited, Daniel, to build on both your leadership and the collaborative nature of this collaborative, which has really been exciting for us the past, like year, 18 months or so to see blossom and bloom. So thank you all for being a part of our community. And Daniel, just special thanks and our best wishes to you as you take this really exciting and powerful step into your next phase.
Thank you.
Looking forward to
so
working
much.
closer with you. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's certainly not a goodbye. It's going to be a hello and a welcome from a new vantage point where we can continue to advance the work of this collaborative and beyond towards racial equity and social justice. And thank you all for the love in the chat. I'll catch up with those messages, but I'm seeing them come through. So a few logistics before we head into our youth artists and performance. Today's session is being recorded and will be sent out in a follow-up message along with all of the links, slides, and resources that are mentioned in today's program. And a special thank you and acknowledgement to Neptali Ramirez, because as I'm hoping all of you know, it always takes a team of people who aren't the speaking people on the Zoom to make programs and events like this happen. And Neptali is coordinating a lot of aspects on our technical and logistics details in the back end. So thank you so much, Neptali, and many others. I think there was a prompt that was put into the chat, so please continue to respond to that. What inspires you about youth organizing and what brought you here today? We definitely want to get the engagement and the chat going for your participation and engagement. And now I have the pleasure to introduce Ariana Quetzal Vargas, who is our youth artist and performer today. Ariana is born and raised in San Francisco and is currently a doctoral student at Arizona State University, where her research is focusing on how communities heal from state and carceral violence. She will be performing a piece today that uplifts joy, dignity, and inspiration. I'm going to pass it over to Ariana now to lead us through her poem.
Okay, thank y'all for having me today. It's an honor to be in this space with y'all. So I'm gonna get into it. Okay, mi comunidad. Yo soy de la misión. I am from the mission. A young girl who grew up dodging bullets from gangs. I remember my mom always telling me to not kick it on 20th and Lexington. The first corner I saw someone get shot. Now I see techies lined up for ice cream on the same corner I first faced death. I was 4. Fast forward to almost 20 years later, in exactly 2 days, and I'm still scared of guns. Only this time, I'm scared of the gang that wears all blue. No, not the Sureño gangs, but the pigs who murdered my friend. What's his name? Sean Monterosa. Say his name, Sean Monterosa. They took my friend at 22 years old. They paint the picture in the news media, but they didn't know him. If you really knew Sean, you'd know he was shy, He was always sweet, checking in on me in the hallways anytime I was dealing with boy drama. He was always helping me clean after I had a kickback at my house. We watched the Niners Super Bowl at my house the first time we lost. We went to prom together as homies because he was too young to go to junior prom. So we had to sneak him in as my fake date. But the media doesn't know this. La comunidad that raised you does. The cops are supposed to protect and serve, but who? Not us. They see this as a broken system, but I think it's doing exactly what it's meant to do. They don't want us SF kids to survive. They don't want to see us strive. But programs in this community continuously educate us SF kids. They protect us. They protect us more than people in the blue uniforms. Youth programs saved me. Youth programs saved Sean. But the murders in blue took you from us. What are we supposed to tell our kids to do if even when you got your hands up, you still get killed? Sean, although you were taken from us, you're still flying like the toucan bird you've always been. You're pushing us to continue to fight for justice for you and your family and everyone else who's been taken from us unjustly. Say her name, Breonna Taylor. Say his name, George Floyd. Say her name, Vanessa Guillen. Say your name, Sean Monterosa. Your sister, Ashley and Michelle, they're the strongest guerreras I ever seen. The fight will continue to forever grow because you deserve to be here. La Comunidad taught you to educate yourself and read politically conscious books. Your last text was to your sisters asking them to sign a petition for George Floyd. Although they paint you a certain way, you always had bars as a graffiti artist, so you painting your own canvas of yourself as the real person you always were, loving, caring, and above all, one of the most honorable young men I knew. Even though you ain't here, the presence you had is forever in our hearts. Thank you, Comunidad, for uplifting us youth as we mourn, heal, and grow. Thank you, Sean, for continuing to be a light that pushes us forward for change. As we continue to heal, let's remember the seeds our elders have planted with us, to find beauty in the present moment, to carry our loved ones in our hearts in everything we do. We do things different in the Bay, so wherever your heart takes you, bring that high-fee energy in how you organize, and how you teach, and how you learn. Bay Area Comunidad, this is a love letter to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariana. Please, folks, join me in sending the virtual love and appreciation to Ariana for sharing her poem and her words today. And it feels like it's coming for me at the right time, at the right moment to galvanize so much that we need to do and how much love we need in our communities and for one another to move on from the ills of racism, violence, police brutality, and so forth. So thank you so much, Ariana. I think we might have some contact information or the socials for folks to kind of follow along with you if folks are interested. So we can drop those in the chat to build Ariana's fan base. We'd love to do that. Thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing your words. Now I'm going to introduce and pass it on to Albert Maldonado, who is Senior Program Manager at the California Endowment, to lead us into more of the specifics of our program today and the field of youth organizing, and then into our community panel. So Albert, over to you.
Thanks, Daniel, and hello and welcome everyone. First, let me introduce myself, Albert Maldonado, he, him, his, as Daniel said, with the California Endowment. So I also just want to, kind of echo and speak out against the hate against our Asian brothers and sisters. And I think, I was at the Endowment, I was inspired by our API staff who really led a teach-in, and one of our colleagues gave a really powerful talk around the intersections of, kind of white supremacy and racism and how it cuts across communities of color. And so, just shout out, lots of love, and know that we have to continue to speak out and work in solidarity together. I also want to express a lot of appreciations to Jay and Yo Cali always for, kind of being our community anchor behind the scenes and helping us to bridge between philanthropy and our youth organizers and youth organizing staff at the local level. But a lot of special love out to Daniel today and Northern California Grantmakers. So I think, it's great to see you, Kate, but a lot of our work wouldn't be, and we wouldn't be here without, NCG and Daniel, really stepping in and being incredible partners, really anchoring our work in Northern California and the Bay Area. as we've thought about this work. So folks asked me to kind of tell us about how we kind of got to this moment. So I'll be brief, because I know we actually want to hear from our organizers and folks to really shed light on what's playing out in the ground. So for context, this conversation began actually in 2017. I'm part of I'm part of the Funders Collaborative on Youth Organizing, a national coalition of funders who have come together to support youth organizing. I know Eric Braxton, executive director of FCYO, is here with us now. But we had a funders briefing in LA, much like today, and big credit to Tessa and Jadon with San Francisco Foundation. They kind of pulled me aside and said, hey, how do we really raise a profile of this work, not only within SF Foundation, but also in the Bay Area, and how do we kind of coordinate and come together? And since that time, we've really just been having folks come together, both from the community, other funders, to kind of get a better lay of the land. And that work really took place between 2018, 2019. We did a lot of collective learning, San Francisco Foundation. Thank you, Jay, for sharing the infographic from FCYO. Here in the graphic, you'll see a kind of national landscape of youth organizing. So FCYO has identified, 300 or so organizing groups across the nation. California is home to more than 100, and as part of our group here in the Bay Area, we're supporting 25, and we had applicants for far more than that. So just wanted to kind of give context, and the infographic actually gives a lot more detail and color to the field of youth organizing. And I think it's important to note that the field of youth organizing, as we engage young people, they work across multiple issues, but it really is rooted in intergenerational partnerships, right? So, a lot of adult allies and increasingly adult accomplices are supporting our young people as change makers. And so last year, as the pandemic was setting in, we had already begun to raise funding from our various partners. And last year, we were able to, really deploy our first set of community grants. And we'll actually hear more about that, on the impact as well as the process. But I think what we're really excited about in this conversation with you all is, how do we continue to grow support for our youth organizing partners? And in our conversations with our youth organizing partners, one of the things that they really lifted up for us is the need for us to really organize amongst ourselves as funders, right? How do we really come together in a synergistic way, coordinate with each other, and actually have conversations with each other in a way that's more fruitful and building towards authentic relationships, with our youth organizing partners on the ground. And so I think we're really proud to kind of share more about that in the course of today's conversation. But we're also here and, to enlist, additional folks who want to join us at the table. I would say that it's been an incredible, 2 to 3 year run on kind of getting this work up off the ground. And we're really excited to really sharpen our focus in additional areas, bring new folks to the table, and we'll get deeper into that in the later course of the conversation. So on that note, I'm going to begin to pause and hand it off to my colleague Amy Price with the Zellerbach Family Foundation, who will actually lead us up in our panel discussion. So Amy, I'm going to pause there and hand it off to you.
Thanks, Albert. Good morning, everyone. I actually just sort of became more deeply involved with this group a few months ago. So see, this is what can happen to you if you become involved also. So I'm thrilled, and it's one of the meetings I actually look forward to is joining this group, and I'm really happy and honored and privileged to be here today, and really to facilitate this panel of extraordinary organizers who's going to give us a little context setting of the power and value and need for youth organizing, as well as a little insight into the experience of participating in this collaborative process as an organizer. So I am going to briefly introduce our three panelists, one of whom, I would say all of whom wear many, many hats and do the work of 10 people in any given day. And one of whom is just coming from class, so maybe a few minutes late in joining us. But I'm going to give you a brief introduction, and then you have their full bios on the registration program page. So first, we're going to hear from Kriya Gomez, who's the Director of Local Initiatives at the Young Women's Freedom Center. Kriya started her journey as a community organizer with the Young Women's Freedom Center, which was then the Center for Young Women's Development, many years ago. Not too many, Kriya, but years ago. And she came back to the center in 2017 after serving as a teacher and dean of students at the North Oakland Community Charter School. She has over 20 years of experience in youth development, community organizing, restorative justice, and program management. After her, we will hear from Xochitl Larios, who is a program associate with Courage's Youth Justice Program. Xochitl is 21 years young. She is a college student and the 2018 recipient of the California Endowment Youth Award as a community champion. She has very well deserved. She served as the youngest fellow for the peer-to-peer initiative through the Community Justice Network for Youth program of the Burns Institute, is also a youth commissioner on the Alameda County Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Commission, key member of the Free Our Kids Coalition, and she uses her own youth transformation curriculum with detained youth. And did I mention she's also a full-time student? And then we will hear from Ophelia Bayo, who is Executive Director of Youth United for Community Action, or YUCA, in East Palo Alto. Ophelia was born and raised in East Palo Alto, has a master's in urban planning and public affairs, and is passionate about working in intergenerational coalitions with people of color from low-income backgrounds. She also, again, the many hats, sits on East Palo Alto's Planning Commission, chairs the Bahali Community Land Trust Board of Directors, sits on the Joan Platt YMCA Managers Board, and is a board member on the California Community Land Trust Network. So I just first want to say a deep appreciation for you incredibly busy people for taking time out to share with us today. So first, I'm going to direct the first question to Kriya, if you can just briefly give us an overview of the power and importance of youth organizing, and speak a little bit about the impact that the last year has had on the field, both in terms of COVID-19, racial reckoning, the elections, and everything else that we've all endured the last year. Kriya, on to you.
That's a lot. I will be real brief because we have some amazing youth speakers, and I really want to make sure that we hear from them. And so, I think that the first thing, that it is pretty obvious, I'm sure, to everyone on this call is that, youth have been the catalyst for some of our nation's most significant movements. And, youth organizing is extremely important to the liberation work that's happening across the nation right now, because, youth organizing creates these safe spaces for youth to discuss issues and social problems that directly impact them. And oftentimes, youth aren't invited to the tables where decisions are being made about their lives and their futures. And so youth organizing creates that space. I also think, for young folks, we're learning, right? We're learning to take their lead because the nuances and the innovations to language and identity, and even the conversations around power and patriarchy are being led by young people right now. I think, and who better to talk to other young people than young people, right? When we need to gain information or understand the true impacts of oppression and adultism and patriarchy, who better than to talk to those that are being impacted through the systems without the ability and the autonomy to make those changes themselves, right? So I'm so grateful that that as a young person, I had the ability to be part of these safe spaces and had the ability to be seen and to be heard. And I just want to shout out a couple of folks that were youth organizers with me. Fela Thomas, who's on this call, Prishni, who's on this call, are all folks, it's one of the other important things about youth organizing is that it's a place to develop our future leaders and people that will ultimately make real change in the world when they have that ability to do and that power as adults. I think COVID has really, really impacted the way that young people convene. And those safe spaces are now being virtual, and they don't have the same impact. Young people are struggling with finding safe spaces in their homes, and particularly in pockets, metropolitan areas where gentrification has really impacted the way that young people are living. Right? It's hard to be able to have a real conversation about how you're being impacted when you are in a home with 6 or 7 other people and you're asked to go to school for 4 to 6 hours a day and everything is online, when that's not the natural relationship, the way that young people build relationships. So I think it's been hard, but I also think that young people have taken this opportunity to get real creative with direct action. And I think it's a heed to all of us that when they do decide to take to the streets and they do decide to take action, that we understand how important it is that they're willing to risk their lives to do that during a time like COVID.
Thanks, Kriya. Really appreciate it and appreciate what folks are working through and the conditions they're working in right now. Before I turn it over to Sochi, I want to encourage everyone to pose questions in the chat throughout, and we will try to leave some room after the 3 panelists to respond to questions, comments, etc., and then hopefully some time at the end as well. So Sochi, thank you for running here after your class. And if we can turn it to you now to speak a little bit about what you are hearing, seeing, and experiencing in the field as a young person among your peers. So
can you say that one more time, because somebody transferred my thingy and then it like a question came up or something.
Sure.
But
so if you can just speak to, as a young person in the field, if you can speak to what you are hearing, seeing, and experiencing in the field as yourself and among your peers.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Sochi Larios. I go by she's and hers, or Sochizi or Soch, anything by love. I currently work for Communities United for Restorative Youth Justice as a youth program associate. However, I think it's important to know that Courage actually met me inside our juvenile hall located in San Leandro here in Alameda County. And now I also evolved and flourished into a youth commissioner when I got off probation in 2018, at the end of 2018. And along my way and along the path, I've noticed that I represent young people that are actually transitional age youth, that are actually coming from juvenile hall or an incarcerated facility, because that's how Courage, a nonprofit grassroots organization, actually met me. So along the way, I noticed that youth needed to be exposed, that there was a disconnect from nonprofit grassroots organizations that are culturally rooted, because Courage taught me La cultura cura model, which is the culture heals. And this is before COVID, obviously, because we would go into sweat lodges because I really needed to heal from my trauma. Because I was incarcerated 200 and plus days, and my mom was still homeless, my sister were still homeless, so there was a lot of pain, so that needed to be recognized. And a lot of the times in a school system that doesn't teach us healing, that doesn't teach us culturally rooted practices, I was like disconnected from the knowledge. And I think that's something that I noticed, that the people that I was representing, that I'm representing today, is missing. So there needs to be more exposure and also capacity. I noticed that even when young people are now like gamed up, because I consider myself now a seasoned youth leader, I'm actually finding myself coming back as a credible messenger to juvenile hall, with my OGs. For example, like Kriya is someone that I work in a space with a lot, and she always puts me on and she always games me up on the scene. And that's what we need. We need our, our peace builders, our OGs, our bigger homies, really telling the younger homies, guiding them, because like I was disconnected, right? I knew how to move and groove in the streets, but I didn't know how to move and groove in politics. So when you talk about young people and their board of supervisors to kids in juvenile hall, they don't know what that means. They don't know what they're representing. It's just them feeling guilt and having to come back to society to, pay their duties forward, instead of actually teaching them where they come from, their culture and their fault, and that it's a systematic, it's bigger than this, right? Instead of teaching me that I'm actually hurting, or why I did this, don't teach me in a pamphlet, teach me, come teach me something that a win in history or something, and something that you can relate to, all these empowered people. So again, I'm finding myself coming back into juvenile hall and actually teaching these young people, because again, I'm being authentic. This is kind of like my path, my journey, and that's like my relation to the work, and what I'm finding the young people needing. It's really culturally rooted education, and also capacity funding on the nonprofits to also support us young people for like bigger cohorts of young people in the organizations. And yeah, and always believing in us. Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, am I muted? Thank you, Sochi. You raised in that brief time so many issues. I think the power of healing, the power of culture, relationships in general, and also the importance of elders, OGs, etc., to support and guide young people and value them, most importantly. So we're going to shift a little bit as we turn over to Ophelia. If you could talk, Ophelia was part of the phase 1 process for the participatory grant making. And so I'm going to ask you if you can speak a little bit about that process, both takeaways from the field design session and also the impact and importance of the phase 1 funding. So Ophelia.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Amy. And thank you, Krita. Thank you, Sochi, for everything you've shared. Such a wealth in those like brief remarks that we were able to hear. But I think one of the things, to talk briefly about the impact of the first round of funding, it's really appreciated that funding is passed on to nonprofits, to organizations that is general operating. And it's actually really, really important that we have the flexibility, that organizations have the flexibility to really mold that into what it needs to be for our respective organizations. Is something that we're hearing increasingly from our peers across the board, all, from youth organizers on the West Coast, on the East Coast. General operating funding is super important. And yeah, that's what this was. So we had the really freedom of molding that funding and applying it to where we saw fit in the best places possible. In terms of takeaways of the design session, it's really appreciated that the process takes into account, it really integrates, obviously, as it should be, the voices of our youth organizers. They are the experts on this. If you're gonna ask what is needed, they are the folks who know. And we at UCA, take a lot of pride in our leadership development pipeline, and we're the places where all of our young leaders land in future years after they graduate and pass on from UCA. But we also are strongly of the mind that they're leaders today. Young people are leaders today, as has already been said. We're not just strictly, here are the leaders of tomorrow. These are the leaders of today. And they're very grounded in the experiences of our community. And like I said, experts in some of these topics that really are not incorporating youth organizers, youth voices as much as they should. Moving on really quickly to some of the highlights from the design session that we had, there were really three main things that stood out from at least from the conversations from the breakout group that I was in, and that I know for a fact our youth organizers from UCA, shout out to Akila, Raquel, Christina. I hope they hear this when they go back and watch this, but they really brought up the importance of mental health and how emotionally taxing it is to do this work. And don't get me wrong, our young people are committed. They are like, we're ready. They show up every day. We didn't lose a single young person in the year of COVID, which was the hardest programmatic year for us to date. To transition basically overnight from being in person to doing things, to adapting to doing political education, life lessons, campaign organizing online was extremely hard, but we did not lose a single youth. And that takes me to my next point, that part of the reason why I feel like, fairly strongly feel like we were able to retain every single youth organizer is because UCA compensates them. UCA pays our youth organizers stipends. We value your time. We value your expertise, your experience, your wisdom, and what you have to offer and what you bring to the table. So it's not this extractive process. It's not this like, give us your ideas and we'll go figure out, or give us your input and we'll take what we want. It is wholeheartedly rooted in the experience and expertise and importance of centering the youth and youth voices in issues from racial justice in the public education system, transformative justice, restorative justice, to what climate resilience, culturally competent climate resilience and environmental justice conversations look like, to housing and anti-displacement. These days, we know that, connecting briefly back to the mental health point, that home is not just home, it's school, it's daycare, it's the gym, it's everything. And in East Palo Alto, there's a lot of multi-generational homes. So a lot of our young people don't even have rooms, right? They're doing homework in the living room, they're typing essays on phones up until recently. So that all informs the way that they're able to do our work and the way that they show up at UCA. Just to reiterate, stipends, super important. Let's compensate all of our youth organizers for the work that they do, because that is not light work. That is very emotionally taxing, very important, critical work that is building up our movements across the country. The last point that that I wanted to touch on that also surfaced at that design session is the importance of stability for our youth organizers and our staff and our organizations. We know that in the Bay Area, there is, in California, really, across the country, my experience is all in the Bay Area, but gentrification and displacement is making it really, really hard for us to be stable. And therefore, our minds are preoccupied with a whole bunch of stuff. Am I going to make enough to pay my rent tomorrow? Are we going to have to, like what that looks like also informs our work and how we as staff show up to do this work. So for us at UCA, this is actually culminating to a really critical point for us, because after 12 plus years of fighting gentrification and anti-displacement in East Palo Alto and in San Mateo County, displacement is now knocking on our front door. Just a couple months ago, our landlord, who's an absentee landlord, decided that he wanted to renovate our home converted office and put it on the market for sale. 1.2 million for the site as is, 1.9 with some very modest renovations. So you can imagine the irony of, a troop of youth organizers who have been dedicating many years to fighting displacement, now dealing with our own displacement fight. If it's okay with everybody, I'm going to drop in our GoFundMe, because we are committed to staying anchored in East Palo Alto, staying rooted in East Palo Alto, and we're fundraising to do so. And I'm proud to say we're approaching our goal. I think this is going to become a reality for us. It is super, super exciting to know that we get to truly permanently anchor youth organizing in East Palo Alto, in San Mateo County, in perpetuity, if we're able to pull this off. And everything in my gut and my ancestors and our whole community are telling me that this is possible. So I'll stop there. And of course, be more than happy to answer any questions. And I'll take a second to drop in that GoFundMe. And it has a lot more detail about what's going on with that in the narrative part of our GoFundMe.
Thank you so much, Ophelia. And again, thanks for taking time, as I know you're fighting this battle for UCA's life and stability. And so really appreciate you being here. And I hope everybody goes to the link that she puts in the chat. So you brought up a lot of points about sort of what is needed and obviously the importance of leadership development, but also of recognizing the value and experience and expertise of youth now, the critical need to pay them and compensate them for their time and their expertise, and stability, both for the young folks and for the organizations that they're working with and connected with. So I want to turn it back to Sochi to speak a little bit about, as we move into phase 2 of this collaborative funding process, if you can build on what Ophelia was talking about, and your recommendations for criteria for future funding and capacity building and needs for youth organizing in the Bay Area. And then I'm going to ask Ophelia and Kriya to chime in as well after Sochi.
Hi again, I just turned my camera on so you guys can see me. Yeah, I think it's it's really direct. Sometimes we're always looking and searching for longer answers, but it's clear. In my experience with funding, I've noticed that sometimes there is restricted funding where there's only a certain way that you can use the money. And then in those restricted funding processes, I've come to find out that there's also long reports, and they're really stressful because as a young person, you have to think about all the things that they're balancing, all the things that Ophelia literally just clearly mentioned, like all the things, housing situations, housing instability, getting pushed out. You don't know if a student or a young person is taking school here or has no Wi-Fi, so they're borrowing or going to the library Wi-Fi. Because I know growing up in Hayward, I used to go to the city hall in downtown right there by the bar, and they used to have free Wi-Fi all day. So it's kind of like, how can you make it where you're actually teaching me, you're actually already pre-guiding me on these report processes, so in the future you can see me succeed and evolve and develop into something stronger and something more unique. And that's it. That's all I would like to share.
Kriya, Ophelia, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I really want funders to understand the importance of providing enough money to youth organizing groups so that they can provide a livable wage to their young people. Not just, a little bit of extra change than minimum wage, but, when I was a youth organizer, I was getting paid $8.50 when the minimum wage was $4.25. And it literally saved my life. It allowed for me to give up, the underground street economy that I was participating in to focus full time on the work that I was learning to enjoy and that I was feeling was really important. And that I wholeheartedly wanted to participate in, but that I couldn't fully do because I needed to make money. And during COVID, what we're learning is a lot of the young folks, because their immune systems aren't as compromised as other members of their homes, living in, as Ophelia said, multi-generational homes. These young people and the income that they're making through these part-time jobs or these internships is really supporting whole households. So now more than ever, they need a livable wage. The other thing is I think it's really important that youth organizers have the ability to have discretion for how they utilize that funding. And understanding that sometimes, young people want to be able to take care of each other too. And, I work at an organization where we work with system involved girls and girls that are involved in the underground street economy. And sometimes, young women are literally scrounging to figure out how to get a young woman who's now been empowered through this work and has this consciousness, right, out of a really volatile situation. And so, you know, while our organization provides that type of support, there are organizations that don't, but do understand that these young people are going through really impactful, volatile, violent situations and need that additional, you know, rapid response funding that sometimes funding just doesn't provide. So that's really all I wanted to say. I think, you know, in this moment, those we're learning, right, that those situations are happening more because folks are isolated and they don't have the community that they used to have. And so it's I think it's really important that funders hear that.
Thank you, Kriya. Ophelia, if you want to have a last word, we're going to wrap it up and transition to Lateefah, but if you want to make a last, have a last comment.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think my colleagues, peers here said it perfectly well. And just to give like one example of what youth organizer stipends have been going toward in at least what they're sharing with us over the course of the last year, our youth organizers help their parents pay rent. They buy their own laptops. They're putting away some of their savings as much as they can for college. Like these are very real, like very transformative things for them. And it's, I just, as much as possible, like I want to super reiterate the importance of that. I think, you know, I'm preaching among the choir here because I think folks really get it. But there have been really humbling examples of how youth are using their funds to support their families and to support themselves. So yes to everything that was just mentioned. And I want to take one quick second to apologize to the group. I'm gonna bow out just a little bit early. I know Jay, thank you for dropping in the link for the 11 a.m. meeting that I'm joining so I can keep hustling for our peeps and join another call to try and continue fundraising so we can make this Yucca House purchase happen for our youth organizers. So yes, sorry for bowing out early. This has already been so enriching. So thank you all again for inviting me. I'll linger on for a bit more.
Thank you all so much. Good luck, Ophelia, with meeting your goal, which I know you will do. And we're going to transition, but I guess I just want to wrap up. I think that that too often when we think of youth organizing, it's about getting policies changed and advocating for things. And I think what we heard today is it's about healing. It's about supporting young people and their families and communities. It's about stabilizing the organizations that support these young people. And I think as funders, we need to move out of the scarcity model of supporting youth organizing and really give them what they need and trust them to use those resources as they need to support themselves. So thank you to Ophelia, Sochi, and Kriya. Really grateful for your time and for all that you do and for all that you are. So thank you. Going to transition now to Lateefah Simon, who of course needs no introduction, but I'm going to take just a second. First of all, I'm just so honored to be able to introduce Lateefah, and I'm grateful that you are taking time out of your crazy schedule. So as most of you know, Lateefah is not only a national leader in civil rights and racial justice, she is the president of the Akonadi Foundation. She also serves as the board president for BART and is also a member of the California State University's Board of Trustees. And that's just a few of the many hats that she wears. But her roots are in community organizing and youth organizing. And she started at 19 as the director of the Young Women's Freedom Center, which was the Center for Young Women's Development, is now the Young Women's Freedom Center, and was honored with the MacArthur Genius Award for her role in that work as the youngest woman to receive that award at age 19. So Lateefah, so honored to have you here, and I am going to turn it over to you to share your wisdom with us. So thank you.
I don't know what else to say. I've been on the line for 5 minutes and I'm like, we're done here. But you know, there's what was just said by these three dynamic women was just really profound and powerful. And Kriya, you know, you brought me back. Sochi brought me back. Thinking about Yucca almost 20 years ago brought me back. And so what I'm hoping to do in the time that I have with you all is maybe to tell some stories. And some of you funders, like Tessa, you know, we're going to age each other, Tessa. I've known you for about 25 years, I think. Um, but I want to talk about this heavy burden that is on young people. And having come from organizing and now being on the other side of the table, how my experience now as a funder is deeply shaped by my days at the center as a 16-year-old girl knocking on doors in the Tenderloin. But before I begin that story, I think it's fitting to say that I got my job, which was paying double the minimum wage in 1994, 95, because there was a young Native woman who I was very good friends with. We ran the streets together day in and day out. And I had dropped out of high school because I needed to work. I needed to work. I didn't want to work. And I was working fast food. Many of you all know this story. Um, and a young woman named Priya Gomez, was dear friends with, came into Taco Bell one day telling me about a job that she got. And I was so excited for her, but deeply felt trapped behind my cash register, knowing that all that I had been through and all that I had seen. And of course, we stayed in contact, and she let me know at one point that the Street Survival Project, which became the center, was hiring. And what I was able to do, before we get into the politics of the work that we did, but before, I didn't understand that there was a possibility for me where I was in my life. I was on probation, that I could be a part of something bigger than myself, not to mention the idea that a job, an economic opportunity would give me the pathway back to high school, that I could stop working 8 hours a day and work 4 hours a day and get the same amount of money, because I worked for an organization that wasn't about youth empowerment, that wasn't about youth development. When I got the job at the Street Survival Project, the center, the premise of that organization was to provide an economic opportunity for girls on the streets. In the time of the HIV epidemic, the proliferation of the war on drugs, the street economy in San Francisco, as it still is, was intense. It was massive, and there were young people, as there are now, who were living and working and surviving on the streets because many of their parents could not take care of them, or should not have been able to take care of them. On my first day as a youth organizer at the center, it was made clear to me, um, not just my own experience, but that systems who were supposed to support young people, including youth organizations, were failing poor young people, low-income young people who were in systems. And to see 10 girls around me who were being gainfully employed and trained in a space where learning was encouraged and expected, where from day one, we were given the opportunity not just to hit the streets and to organize members of girls who were out there hustling, but that we were responsible for learning the ins and outs of running an organization. 2 years later, 3 years later, I became the executive director of the center and was there for 11 years. But when I think about those times, those early days as executive director, being introduced to organizations like Olin, was a Latino membership organization in Oakland, and some of you all remember Olin during the fight against Proposition 21, and seeing this organization built for and by young people, supported by union leaders and radical elders, bring together a multiracial coalition of other youth organizers across the Bay Area. And for 6 months, as executive director, I stopped our work on the streets with women and girls, understanding that there was a political opportunity for the center and my 15 staff to become a part of a framework that now I look back forever changed the Bay Area, in fact, the state, maybe the nation. When Olene engaged with the center and other groups to educate young people on the schoolyards, out on the streets about Proposition 21, which was an initiative that really rolled back much advocacy almost 20 years ago for young people in systems. We walked 5,000 students out of high schools, middle schools, after 6 months of organizing, shutting down freeways and shutting down streets, calling for a moniker that now we know all too well, schools, not jails, incorporating healing and culture. And we had DJs thinking and understanding that we as young people could change the narrative, that young people not only cared about our lives, but that we wanted to impact systems. That day of that walkout, I went back to the center with our team. And it was in that moment that we said, nothing that we do, we will do by ourselves. We will work with other organizations, but our policy work, changing systems, is what we need to be about. We will work in service of the young people on the streets so that they can help us fight. And I just want to talk about, there's a couple of campaigns that the center developed, after that historic day, that historic walkout. We saw the power of young people coming together. We were surrounded by police. Some folks took arrest. We made every major paper in the state. I realized while we lost Proposition 21, we won. We created a youth movement akin to movements that we've all studied. Many of us are still in the work today, leading organizations like Kriya, like George Galvez. George was out there on that walkout, Kriya. We developed an understanding that the best and the most difficult work was to galvanize young people that folks had given up on, that they were completely proximate to system failures, from education to the economy, and that they were fighting to survive. And there had to be an institutions willing and ready to bring them together to fight for a better future, but a better now. The center changed deeply based on these experiences. And I will never forget, and you all have heard these stories as well, but the first campaigns that we realized that we should launch, and then we ultimately won, while it was amazing work, what was so heartbreaking was that it took a small, very, very, very sparingly funded organization in San Francisco, run by girls, nobody had gone to college, to stop the shackling of teenage pregnant girls when they were going into labor, when they were housed at juvenile hall. We understood what was happening on the inside. You had a district attorney's office, you had the juvenile probation department, you had Department of Social Services, and for whatever reason, you had civil rights groups. No one was standing up for incarcerated children, or no one understood the horrors that they were dealing with. We were shackling girls while they were giving birth in 2002 in San Francisco. The center developed a coalition of girls who had witnessed this practice or who had been through it themselves. We developed and organized young women who had to express their breast milk in their jail cells and give their breast milk back to social workers after their babies were taken, after they gave birth. We galvanized groups of young people who had been deeply scarred by systems to eradicate that practice. We won that campaign. We connected with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under the leadership of Eva J. Patterson, and she supported us with lawyers. What was so amazing about that win was we proved to ourselves that not only could we fight, but we could win. The last story that I'll tell you, in our work at juvenile hall and on the streets, the horrors that we uncovered by systems were so egregious and so outrageous that we realized that unfortunately, organizations who were 5, 10 times our size, whether they didn't have the will or they didn't understand, but it was going to be on us. When we learned that in juvenile hall in San Francisco, in the city of county of San Francisco, queer youth were being isolated, not because they were under duress, but they were locked and shackled and put in cells by themselves because the staff was homophobic and transphobic. We developed a campaign, Fought and Won, brought in 250 young people to a probation commission meeting in our first action. And we ridiculed, again, state government actors, local county government actors for violating the basic human rights for young people. But we worked in coalition, again, with advocates and lawyers to develop a way forward. We won that campaign and changed that practice and fired the ombudsman and created new training for staff, not just in juvenile hall, but for staff who were working with wards of the court throughout the city and county. While there's so many more wins that the center has succeeded in over the past now 27 years, the fundamental lesson that I have learned from one, being on the ground, and now being on the other side of the table, is that system change takes a very long time. But historically, not just in this country, but all over the world, progressive social movements have been led by young people who are fighting to survive, who are in many cases dying to survive. So how dare we ask for outcomes in a year, for young people to have to fix and mend systems together that ripped them apart. Akonadi is a very small organization, but we're committed, and why I'm there and really nowhere else, committed to supporting not only the radical ideas, but the process, understanding that you don't get police out of schools and cheer and say, we're done here, that was a 10-year fight, and young people and parents, Black and brown folks, have figured out that they themselves and community have to fight for their survival, and that organizing is not a campaign. Organizing, being deeply embedded and married to homes, bearing children, giving birth to children, birthday parties, quinceañeras. These organizations are deeply, deeply nestled in community and deserve all the support that they can get. And again, with this, organizing is a job. It is not an activity. Some of the most important work that can be done now, the young people who stopped the new jail builds in Alameda County, a new Camp Sweeney, that was work that in fact saved the county $75 million. The radical imagination of young people who are saying, I don't need this system to heal me. I'm getting it right here. Not only is that work, but that is a clarifying policy position for us to deeply listen to. I'm so excited that we're all gathered together thinking about how we can listen more, how we can fund organizations and deeply trust their work, understanding and knowing that they are battling beast, and that you don't get free with a $50,000 grant. You don't pay someone's salary with a $15,000 grant. Hopefully what we do is we build infrastructure, we build resilience, we build institutions that will outlast the issues that we're fighting, because understanding that there will be more issues. Youth organizing saved my life, but gave me a political praxis, a spiritual praxis, not practice, my praxis, my understanding of how power works, my understanding of why young people in spaces like LA and Detroit and Oakland and San Francisco can, in fact, design a new pathway. They can, in fact, push up against systems that were developed to take care of them that are failing miserably. They can resurrect hope that many of us have lost. They're living and dealing with deep system failure. And there's no cavalry coming. There's no cavalry coming. They will be the ones to rebuild. So I'm super excited that we're moving towards a trajectory of deeply supporting young people's voices, and also ensuring that they can thrive in the process. Thank you so much. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I think I went over my time a little bit, but super exciting to be on this call.
Thank you, Lateefah. Please join me, folks, in thanking and just lifting up the history and the stories that Lateefah shared with us on the power, importance, and critical nature of youth organizing in our past and where we are today, and leading into the future. And I think your remarks set us up perfectly for the next part of our program, where we're going to go into the details of our collaborative and the Youth Power Fund, where we've been and where we're headed. And your words will lift us in this next part of the program, Lateefah. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
I want to invite Tessa Callejo, of the Senior Program Officer with San Francisco Foundation, to lead us through this next section. And Tessa, I'm going to get the screen share slides up for you right now.
First of all, I just want to do a collective deep breath for a minute to take in everything that Lateefah had to say to us today. And I don't know about you, but I could have spent the rest of this morning and then into the afternoon listening to her stories and being inspired and being called to action. I just want to say that I'm Tessa Callejo. I'm a senior program officer at the San Francisco Foundation for our Power Pathway, and I'm one of the proud co-funders of this collaborative that we've begun that has birthed the Youth Power Fund as of this last year. But I just also want to start by saying something very personal, which is that when Lateefah said that youth organizing had saved her life, I think actually there's a bunch of funders even on this call who might have a similar story. And I just want to share that I was a foster kid in a family because my parents couldn't take care of me. And I was, and I found organizing in middle school and in high school in Berkeley schools. And in Berkeley High School, my first organizing campaign, I think it, was in the 70s. So I'm just going to age myself here. This is an intergenerational movement. Was to get armed police off of my high school campus. And all of us were organizing around that. So a lot of us come to this work and are in this effort because we either have been touched by or we've experienced what the power of organizing is in people's, especially Black, Indigenous, and people of color, young people in our communities, what the power of organizing is and means in the now and moving into the future. So my part here is going to be short. I'm just going to do a couple of minutes about what is the organizing, the Funders Organizing Collaborative, Youth Organizing Collaborative. What are we trying to do? What have we done so far? And what are we planning to do? And then invite you all to join us in some shape or form. And that's up to you. But we're going to have a time where we break into small groups to share a bit in terms of what brought us to this conversation and to ask some questions. So if you would give me the next slide, that would be awesome here. You can see that the NCG and the Youth Organized California Network are backbones to our organizing collaborative that we created that Albert discussed earlier. I guess I want to say the Youth Power Fund is a vehicle for something much greater, which is that that we come together and truly commit to funding and deeply trusting our youth organizers and their organizations. Some of those are intergenerational organizations. Some of them are youth-led and centered exclusively. And Jay Ishida, who is not online, but I hope at the very end will come on so everybody can know Jay, has been working with us with Youth Organized California, as has NCG, and some of the initial funders are up here on the screen that you can see. People who gave seed funding. We raised $1 million in the first year to get this off and going. That's not a huge amount of money. I just want to say it is great, and we are incredibly grateful to all of the funders, but it's going to take a lot more to sustain, support, and create the space that we've been talking about and hearing about from Sochi and Priya and Ophelia and Lateefah this morning. And you can see that there's a coordinating committee of folks from different foundations and Department of Children, Youth, and Families as well here in San Francisco. So the great thing about this effort is that you do not have to be putting money into a pooled fund to be part of this table. And we began doing funders briefings, working with Funders Collaborative on youth organizing, and trying to listen and connect with the organizing field. Next slide. That would be great. And we, last year, things took kind of a critical turn. I think what happened is, as the pandemic hit, we had not yet decided, we had raised some funding. We were trying to figure out, what's the added value that a collaborative that's based in Northern California could bring to support our organizers, who, as you heard, are making sure that they can eat and they can stay housed, and they're supporting their families, and they're doing it on really tight budgets and with not a lot of visibility and not the kind of support that they need from our philanthropic organizations. Let's just call it for what it is. And so that's what motivated us to come together. And then when the pandemic hit, right before the pandemic, what happened is that we realized that we needed to move whatever resources we had raised as quickly as possible, because even then we knew that organizations were stressed and stretched and had so many demands. Then the pandemic hits and the economic fallout. And we then committed in the spring, in conversation with the organizing field. The organizers in the youth organizing field said, organize your squad, get philanthropic organizations to join you and to contribute to general operating support and deeper investments and multi-year, and bringing us together with you so that we can be the centering force in the design and in decision making. So that's what we did, is we came together, we created, as you can see, our goals are, it's beyond grant making. It's advancing an entire ecosystem of youth organizers and funders and key partners who will work together over time across issues, across communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color, young people, funders who will support them and work with them, those who are on the front line. And from the beginning, it's been an effort that has been designed to be collaborative. So even our first round of grant making, which was to move out initial grants in the fall, because we hadn't raised the resources yet, we said, okay, we've got 500,000, we're gonna do general support grants for 6 months. Next slide. And we are going to go beyond the wonderful thing of doing funders briefings that we're really good at, and we touched into a lot of conversations with funders. We're going to fund youth organizing groups and intergenerational groups that center youth of color and that are led by and have programs or projects or entire organizations led by BIPOC young people. And so 6 young people from the Ocali Steering Committee came with 6 funders. We raised the initial funding and we made those grants, general support. And that's when NCG came in. And we moved those grants out in November, and they cut across different issues. It's not all about issues. It's not all about one particular community, though we gave priority to Black youth and Black serving organizations as one of the priorities. So next slide, please. And so what that did is that it brought us into relationship with some of you, and we stopped doing funders briefings for a while and began doing deeper conversations with our youth organizing leaders. Coming off of phase 1, in phase 1, I'm gonna ask if, maybe I'll just do it myself. I'm going to drop into the chat, take a minute here, and I'm going to drop into the chat the list of the organizations that were chosen. So remember, this was, youth working with the funders to say, we have these limited funds to kickstart this work. Who should we choose, and what should be those criteria? So it was co-designed and it was participatory, and that is intrinsic to this process. So if you are interested in joining us, what you'll find is there's a seat at the table. And that whether you align your funding and help strategize and figure out alongside our youth organizing allies and partners, or whether you pool your funding, however you choose to participate, I think this today is a call to conscience and call to action. And so next slide, you'll see that this is deeply relationship building. We are not about, a campaign. We are looking at trying to raise funding for a 2-year funding grant making and larger grants, and that capacity building grants or project or programs will align and come alongside this. It's not all about money. I want to say this is about relationship. We need to stand shoulder to shoulder with our young people in the here and now. And so we're really excited to say that in phase 2, there's a place for you, whether it's aligning, whether it's contributing, whether it's helping to plan. And we hope to raise at least $1.5 to $2 million for the collaborative funding and look at ways that we can really do the work with our youth organizing groups, hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder. So to that end, the planning for that, we've slowed down our process, and we are going to take a 4-month process. We're going to raise funds, and we're going to work with the organizations. We've given them additional general support grants, 10,000 across the board. We've also been able to invite them into the planning process, so they will then move with us to figure out what the design will be, and we will launch that next funding stream based on what we have created together. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Daniel and say, we're going to go into some short conversations with one another, and we hope you really seriously consider joining us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tessa. I'll be super brief so that we have as much time as we can in small breakouts. So what we're going to do, we have a few prompt questions that we'll put in the chat to kind of jumpstart the discussion based on Tessa's remarks and the call to action that she's put forward. Each breakout will have 2 design team coordinating members of the collaborative to help facilitate and steward that conversation. And we'll be in breakouts for about 10 minutes and then come back for some closing remarks. So I want to pass it over to Neptali to double check that those breakouts are ready, and we can go ahead into those for about 10 minutes.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Dan, are you going to put up the questions?
Yes, they're in the chat. Thank you, Jay. Okay, so here we go into breakouts. Thanks, everybody. Welcome back, everybody. I hope those were, I know there's that Zoom like sudden cutoff of like, oh, I was just about to say something, or somebody was saying something, but unfortunately the time is running up against our program time together, but I hope those are really generative and helpful conversations. Tessa, I'm gonna pass it over to you for a 2-minute closing.
2-minute, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I always run it. This is my Latina heritage and my mom. It's like running over. Sorry, folks, in advance. But let's just give it up. Let's give it up for all of the speakers, for the work that's going on, for the opportunity and the invitation to us to be part of this movement. And so we just want to really end on a positive note that we are welcoming and engaging funders directly to fund it with us through the pooled fund, to be at the table, to align your grant making, for us to learn together and move together. What's unique in this is that it's really deeply grounded in the co-design and in the participatory grant making. And so we all feel really that that's a particularly powerful and moving part of what we're doing together. And it's not all about the money, but the money matters. We need to be able to have folks having livable wages and getting those mental health supports and the things that were articulated today. So we really want you to feel encouraged, inspired, and connected to us. You saw the planning committee list. We will send out an email with a lot of materials for you. But the table, we meet on a really regular basis, and it is like you do not have to be a funder of the Youth Power Fund to be at this table with us. Zellerbach joined us recently, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and ... we would love you to be a funder of the Youth Power Fund, because we do want to raise that $1.5 or $2 million. We think we can do it. We want to do a couple of multi-year grants, and we're going to follow up with an email shortly. And then the rest of this is the relationship building. We're going to invite you to future events, but we would welcome conversations directly with you and people in your institution. Jay, can you come off not being visible just so people can see you? Because I think we want to end thanking Daniel for his incredible role. And also Jay, Jay has been is really glue from the youth organizing field Jay, do you want to just say a word or two as we close out? Because this is not all about the funders. We are partners with you in this work. Jay.
Yeah, thanks Tessa for that shout out and the intro, and thanks everyone for being here in this space. I do think that the unique piece of the Youth Power Fund is really the kind of interwoven piece of funders and organizers and young people directly coming together. So it is sort of a unique experiment that we are running right now here in the Bay Area, and that Yoccali is hoping to kind of build upon and learn from out in the Central Valley, the Southern California collaborate that Weingard and others are doing down there. So it's really an opportunity, I think, to come into something in this moment of building it from the ground up, and would love to, partner with folks who are here today.
So with that, I think we're going to close, and somebody's acknowledging, thank you for your posters behind you, Jag, you're on fire. So join us in whatever shape or form, and thank you for being here, and thank you most of all to the youth organizers and leaders who are on the front lines every day. We are here to walk with you, and this is a movement moment, and we recognize that. So onward, adelante, thank you, goodbye, and good afternoon. See you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.